Oh! Hello everybody. Today I'll be talking about the Criterion Collection release of Alain Resnais' 1959 Hiroshima Mon Amour. This was a 2015 release on Blu-ray only. It's Region A because it's North America and the Criterion Collection. It is, however, a new 4K restoration supervised by the Swiss cinematographer Renato Berta and completed in 2013 by Argos Films, Technicolor and Groupama Gan Foundations, and Cineteca di Bologna. I'm sure I butchered most of those names, but I did my best. The picture was mostly pristine. A few shots maybe here and there looked soft, which could just as easily be the source material, but otherwise it was a perfect showcase for one of the most beautifully shot movies I've ever seen. The audio is uncompressed mono, which is true to the original source and something I definitely appreciate. It was rich with great presence and perfect balance between the dialogue and music, which is important, especially with this movie, because those two elements are so intertwined. And I'll touch on that later, but both were clean, rich, and crystal clear. The extras were great. They included an interview with Francois Thomas, who wrote a book about Resnais, and that interview is focused more on the movie instead of spending too much time on the context in which the movie was made. That being said, he did have one really interesting tidbit that Resnais had just made Night and Fog, which is a short documentary about Nazi concentration camps. And that was incredibly powerful, not just for the horrific images, but also for the poetic, contextualizing voiceover that complements the images that he gathered. He makes you think about these things in a different way with his narration. It's a short film, but it's one of the more powerful ones about the Holocaust, which is saying a lot. Hiroshima Mon Amour was originally going to be made as a documentary in the same vein as Night and Fog, but this one about the bombing of Hiroshima. Resnais eventually thought it would work better as a fictional feature for reasons not least of which he didn't want to do a retread of Night and Fog. That's also noteworthy because at that time it was next to impossible for French directors to transition from shorts to features. And I think we're all better off because he was able to do that. There's also an audio commentary by another film historian, Peter Cowie, and that one is actually brilliant. He offers so much insight and so much his own interpretations of what Resnais is trying to do and tying things together with this movie, with Last Year at Marienbad, with Night and Fog, and with other ones that Resnais did. Really a lot of deep insight that he brings to the table on this one. It also features interviews with Alain Resnais and Emmanuelle Riva, who's the star of the movie, and has a documentary about the restoration. As for the movie itself, Riva plays a woman who has built an emotional wall around herself after suffering a traumatic loss near the end of World War II, which is about a decade and a half before this takes place. She protects herself not only by avoiding intimacy and having brief, impersonal affairs, she even says, quote unquote, "I like men," but also by trying to manipulate memory, confusing memory with reality, as if by sheer force she can replace reality with her version of her memory, the version that she likes the most, the version that she wants it to be. In other words, she wants to turn reality into an illusion, which she can manipulate. And she even says at one point, "Love is an illusion." She's married, but this is barely mentioned. He is too, actually, and that's barely mentioned, but a little bit more. And it's kind of interesting because it lets us fill in the blanks about who she is. And I think it works very well in this case when we can let our minds do some of the work and not have these things spoon-fed to us. It's an indication that she possibly got married to fit in with societal norms, but has never opened herself up to her husband and never had a fulfilling marriage, or one what might think would be fulfillment from a marriage. We find out more about this later on. This emotional wall she's crafted is shattered by an intense yet short-lived affair with a Japanese architect in Hiroshima, played by Eiji Okada. It opens with a long montage of devastating documentary footage and reenactments related to the bomb. These are past and present, and while we watch this footage, we hear a conversation through voiceover between Riva and Okada, creating an effect that makes his Night in Fog and Renee's Last Year at Marienbad. If you've never seen Last Year at Marienbad, you'll remember it's centered around a man trying to convince a woman that they've met. Here it's reversed. She's insisting that she's seen Hiroshima. He's insisting she hasn't. And if you've seen Last Year at Marienbad, you're kind of thinking this isn't the same thing. But we soon realize that she's acting in a movie filmed in Hiroshima about peace, since Hiroshima became kind of ground zero for peace protests after the war. And her view of Hiroshima is from museums she's visited, reenactments, and playing in the movie she's in. Of course, he's from Hiroshima, and he has a more realistic perception of the devastation. So what he was really saying is, you don't know or haven't seen the real Hiroshima. You're only seeing this tourist perspective from 50,000 feet up. The same could also be said for how they view their affair. For him, it's real, or he wants it to be real, and for her, she wants it to be an illusion, one that maybe she even hopes to forget, like her previous affairs. And this is where the music really plays a big part in this opening conversation. It seems incongruous, but it also changes mood as quickly as they exchange banter and lines of dialogue and their thoughts. And it's like this throughout the film. The score accentuates what's happening. It doesn't try to dictate our moods. It just kind of tells us where the characters are. It's not quite as expressionistic as Last Year at Marienbad, but it still very much is, and it's lyrical. But still, if you're looking for a traditional story, this ain't it. Instead of having anything resembling a plot, Resnais and his screenwriter Marguerite Duras take us into the middle of the emotions and grapples with memory and reality of two people who fall in love in short order, are spending their last 24 hours together, and know their affair will end just as quickly as it started, because this time tomorrow she'll be on a plane back to France. He grows more obsessed with her memories of her hometown in France, Nevers, because he learns that was the last time she allowed herself to be truly close to someone. To him, this is the last time they could have met and actually stayed together and had a real relationship. This culminates in a mesmerizing central scene where they find themselves at a restaurant or a bar, where he's trying to get her or keep her drunk while she tells him everything about that time and about that traumatic series of events that have made her who she is. He's not necessarily trying to get her drunk just to get her in bed. They've already done that. It's more to get her to dig deeper into her past, to remember more. It's almost cruel on his part, because you can see that it's tearing her apart, and Riva is just fantastic in this scene. But if he can remember her past as clearly as she does, then he can be there with her. He can be the last true love of her life, and this memory can be his new reality. So he keeps feeding her beer, and she keeps downing it, and she's almost in a trance. She even starts referring to him in second person as the German lover from her memories. You know, all I remember of you is your name, you know, she says to him. And it's intense and it's intimate. We're so close in on them the whole time that we don't see or hear any of their surroundings. We forget their surroundings, and we forget that anyone else in the world exists. They're at this restaurant, but they may as well be alone. At one point, he snaps her out of her trance, the camera pulls back, and it reveals that they're sitting in front of this huge window, and through the window is the neon nightlife of Hiroshima. The ambient noise from the restaurant comes back, and for a moment, they're back in the real world. And then they kind of go back into it, and we get engrossed in it again, and we forget that that world is out there again. But when we see that bustling world through the window, it reminds us of her flashbacks when she was shamed by her family for having an affair with a German soldier. She's locked in a cellar, her hair is shaved off, she's got bloody knuckles from trying to crawl out of the cellar, but she was able to look out the window and see Nevers and the world bustling by. Seeing her in the state reminds us not only of survivors of the bomb, which we saw in the early footage, but also the survivors of the Nazi camp we've seen, such as in Night and Fog. And again, it's where he's tying these elements together. At the end of this scene, he asks her if her husband knows her story, and she says no. And that's kind of what I was alluding to before, this idea that she never truly became intimate with her husband, at least not to the degree that she has here with Okada's character. And he nearly jumps for joy, exclaiming that he's the only one who knows. You know, he may as well have taken her virginity. He's that proud to have that slice of her all to himself. Later on, Okada says that he wished she had died in France during the war, and her response is devastating, but not quite for the reasons we might think. It's unexpected and tragic, and it's an insight into the powerful emotions they're feeling. This exchange itself may be Resnais's answer to the age-old question, is it better to have loved and lost than to have never loved at all? And I think his answer is maybe it's probably better if you don't have to remember the loss. Especially during this middle passage, when she is remembering everything clearly, Resnais uses two separate timelines, the present day Japan, which we're seeing in this restaurant, and Riva's flashbacks to Nevers at the end of World War II. He even uses two cinematographers, giving each timeline a different look and feel. In a practical sense, it helps us separate the two timelines and not have to spend time getting acquainted with what we're seeing and who we're seeing. But more so, the different styles evoke the different emotions that they have. The flashbacks in France, shot by Sacha Virny, have more urgency and more use of telephoto lenses that create this distant isolation. Riva and her German lover are separate from the war around them. We don't see the war around them, we only see them. But we're seeing them from a distance. So it's not like the isolation where we're seeing Okada and Riva in the restaurant, for instance, or anywhere else. But the isolation that Virny and Resnais create in Nevers is in line with also how she sees the past at arm's length. The cinematography in Japan by Michio Takahashi was exquisite. This is really the part where when I say it's one of the more beautiful pictures I've seen, it's the Japan cinematography. From the close-ups of hands and torsos as the lovers embrace to travelogue type shots of Hiroshima. The night shots in particular reminded me of Wong Kar-wai's Hong Kong at night, with all the neon, minus the vibrant color. And it brings Hiroshima to life, which is, again, super important because of how Hiroshima is rebuilding literally from the ashes of World War II and the bomb. In a closing montage, these styles merge together as we track through Nevers and Hiroshima with the camera tilted up at the same angle. And that kind of brings everything together. The acting was phenomenal from both Riva and Okada, but Riva especially. Not a false moment or questionable choice, and her emotion, especially when she's recalling the past, it really just draws us in and makes it unforgettable. They are these people. Their emotions are palpable. Near the very end, they've given each other nicknames, each their respective hometown. This gives the title of the film its meaning. Quote, Hiroshima, my love, though the film can also be seen as a love letter to a rebuilding city. HIROSHIMA MON AMOUR is a fascinating take on how our memories shape us and betray us, and at a more practical level, how love is not something you can control or predict. All you can do is hope for the best when it takes hold of you. This definitely makes me want to watch more of Resnais. I already have Muriel or The Time of Return on queue, and I want to revisit Last Year at Marienbad, so stay tuned for those. If you like this video, please feel free to give me a thumbs up. If you like the content overall, feel free to subscribe. That always helps. And until next time, stay tuned.